Miriam. Yes, hi.
How are you? I see your name
But
up.
I'm
I don't see
sitting
your
with my
face yet,
husband.
but I imagine you'll come on shortly.
Oh, I should be on.
No, well, he wants
I'm
us.
talking.
No.
All right, so we are now live. We are live streaming. This is Cantor Don Gurney. I want to welcome all of you to our third installment of Music Matters. And we're trying something very new and different today.
Light off, please.
We're going to have people calling in or coming online and asking some questions that might be on their minds regarding music in general or Jewish music in particular. And in addition, I'm going to be playing some music throughout this next 30 or 40 minutes.
Nice.
Music that I hope will bring some comfort and some peace and some inspiration, as really in a way that only music can do. So I welcome you to join this live stream. Anybody can come in and join at any point. And as we go, have a question in mind, and I'll do my best to answer it as best I can. And Don Levy, if you're there, I'd like to begin today with a recording of a piece of music titled Ruach Elohim. It's a piece composed by a colleague and friend of mine, Cantor Lisa Levine. And I think it's a perfect way to begin today during these days. It addresses God, the Spirit of God, and part of it is in English, so you'll be able to understand the words. May God, God's love protect us and see us through these difficult times. And then the refrain is the blessing of the priests, the traditional Birchat Kohanim, Yevarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. And if we're ready for that, Don, take a listen to Ruach Elohim by Cantor Lisa Levine, sung by yours truly. This is our first shot at this, so I'm just checking in with you, Don, to make sure you're with me. If not, let's see if we can start that one from the beginning. And we'll start again. Ruach Elohim by Cantor Lisa Levine.
May God's Spirit be with you. Ruach Elohim, keep you safe from harm. May the love of God be your shelter from every storm. Adonai,
beautiful piece of music, I think. Again, Cantor Lisa Levine, Ruach Elohim. So we have a few people listening in, and have Abby Barron. Abby, do you have a question for me today?
About the music or?
About anything regarding music or anything else that comes to your mind?
Well, I once, not too long ago, you gave a talk about music. When did music begin? And I missed part of it. And I would like to know, was music played before the Jews, musical instruments played before the going to Babylon? And
Oh, okay,
exactly?
great question. So we're talking ancient music history and specifically ancient Jewish music history. Yes, it was. We have lots of references in the Hebrew Bible that give us a relatively clear, if somewhat limited view or understanding of what music existed in ancient Israel. We do know that there were certain instruments being used even in the ancient temple in Jerusalem, which is originally constructed in about 980 BCE. And we do know for the next 1,000 years until the final destruction in 70 of the Common Era that there was a temple orchestra in the ancient temple consisting of anywhere from 12 to 36 musicians. We don't know specifically what those instruments were, but we do know something about it. They were probably mostly plucked string instruments, perhaps some primitive percussion instruments like the cymbal, perhaps also some primitive woodwind instruments. Right? And we know this because there are a lot of references in the Psalms, Tehillim in the Psalms, which was the liturgy of the ancient temple, which gives us an idea that the overall sound of that temple orchestra was probably not very loud with wind instruments and pluck string instruments. Some of the Psalms end with the phrase Amen Selah.
Right.
And it is thought that the word Selah is an anapoetica term at the end of a psalm that the percussionist would roll the cymbal. Selah. So the word Selah, no one knows actually what that word means, but it's believed that it's possibly just the sound that the cymbal made to mark the end of a psalm. Right?
Many times the Selah is at the beginning, though. They usually, many times in the Psalms, don't they say Selah at the beginning many times too, or no?
Usually not at the beginning, usually at the end. It's a kind of a word that marks the end after Amen, right? Okay. And so we know that this temple tradition, by the way, there was also a temple choir as well as an orchestra, and they were trained musicians. They went through a period of preparation 3 to 5 years. Like everything else that went on in the ancient temple, including all the sacrifices, everything had to be flawless, without blemish. So these were trained musicians that accompanied the ancient temple worship service and the sacrificial service. So this is an ancient, long tradition. And of course, musically, it's a sad ending because once the temple is destroyed, that musical tradition dies with it. These were the Levites, and most of their musical traditions were secret from the rest of the population. And a lot of these musical traditions died with them. And the early rabbis once the temple's destroyed and a whole new authoritative structure is built, which becomes the synagogue, there were laws passed, halachot, that would forbid the use of musical instruments on the Shabbat. Now, some of the reasons are that, well, we're now in exile from our homeland, and we can't use musical instruments, that it wouldn't be in accordance with the laws of Shabbat. Part of that reasoning also was that the new authority in the land, which were the rabbis, were for a long time in opposition with the ancient temple cult and their leadership. It was also designed to make sure that the traditions of the temple remained buried forever. That's a political explanation. Right? So we have a question here that just came in from Jody Berman. Hi, Jody. And Jody asked the question, it seems like there are some pieces of music that just become pervasive. And nowadays there are conferences and the internet. How would music like Kol Nidre become so widespread and canon before these kinds of things existed? That's a great question, Jody, because yeah, how did music become widespread, right? Great question. I'll do the best I can. The melody for the Kol Nidre that we all know in the Ashkenazic tradition, right, which begins with that haunting descending half step. Kol Nidre ve'esarei, so on and so forth, is dated sometime in the 16th century, believe it or not, sometime in the 16th century. And it became the tradition throughout the Ashkenazic world. So how did a melody like that go from one community to another? Well, by word of mouth, quite literally, right? Melodies would be sung. We were an itinerant people. We would move around a lot. The music of Ashkenazic Jewry, specifically the synagogue music, takes about 600 to 800 years to form itself into what it would become known as, right? Nusach Ashkenaz, the musical patterns of Ashkenazic Jewry, right? So one community to another, really in a way that the Torah scroll and the Torah tradition was created as well over hundreds of years, many centuries. Stories and pieces of parchment moving from one community to another until it becomes a whole and it is finalized for all time. I think music like Kol Nidre and many other melodies followed a similar kind of journey until such time as we start writing these things down, right? And Jewish music in general isn't written down in any formal way until the latter half of the 18th and early 19th century, when few Jews really here and there in major cities were allowed to learn how to read and write music and then actually start publishing music. Before that, it's all word of mouth. So we start to notate these things. And once those volumes of music are published and then circulated through communities, they become well established, right? So it would take a lot longer than it would today if I wanted to, put something on YouTube, and who knows how many people would hear it. So it would take a lot longer, but that's pretty much how it would work, community to community, person to person, and build over time. Right? Great question, Jody. Thank you. Miriam Alpern.
Hi, Hassan. How are you?
I am well, thank you. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
How are you holding up during these challenging times?
My husband and I are faring very well, thank you.
That's good to know.
We're in a situation where our kids drive to the sidewalk and we talk on each lawn. They go on the lawn and we go on. I'm so happy that you clarified something that has been bothering me for a long time.
Which is what? Tell me.
You did clarify it, which is why do not the Orthodox synagogues allow any instruments when the temple itself had instruments on Shabbat? But the Orthodox temples today do not allow it.
No, they do not. They do not. And I think what I
and you helped clarify that for me.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I mean, obviously, once it becomes law, Jewish law, then that is the explanation for it, because it was
Yes.
forbidden for
And the
Talmud to.
rabbis, yes, and the rabbis did forbid that. My next question is, you
Yes.
just sang the first two words of Kol Nidre so beautifully, and the
Thank
melody
you.
is so wonderfully recognizable to all of us, and
That's
it
right.
keeps us connected. We who have nostalgia, and also the young new people that are hearing it for the first time in their lives.
It's
But
true.
this is my experience as an ancient senior. When I go to different temples and different Batei Knesset, I hear different Adon Olams. I hear different Enkel Eloheinus. I
Yes.
hear so many different melodies when you put back the Torah, Etz Chaim He, etc.
Exactly.
I
exactly.
cannot connect with all of them. I appreciate the fact that new ones are coming out, but what do you do when you would like to hear a familiar melody and it's not there?
You
What does
know,
one
Miriam,
do about that?
you ask a question that I am asked probably more often than any other, or if it's not in the form of a question, it's a comment. Cantor, why can't we sing the old Shalom Aleichem, right? So it's a very deep question or comment, actually. There's a lot that is within inside of that. And I understand it, and I think about it personally as well. Music has a very unique kind of power and hold on us. Not to be too scientific, but I'm just going to, if I can remember, to quote from Henry David Thoreau. He wrote that, if I could only put into words that music which I hear, that music which can bring tears to the eyes of marble statues, and I'm quoting him directly, to which the very muscles of men are obedient. And Thoreau understood in his own way, and so did the ancient sages, that music has this special power to reach our hearts, our souls, and our brains. And neuroscience proves that out. When we sing, when we actually sing, whether you sing well or not, when we listen to music, we know that the brain releases that happy serum to the body. And it tells us that human beings sing because it is our nature to sing and to make music. And when we are in that moment of creating song, our beings, our brains, our bodies are happy. And all the more so when we sing something that is familiar to us and familiar to our community. As you mentioned, it binds us all together in a very powerful way, right?
Thank you.
And this is very true of the synagogue, as you mentioned. Yes, there are many, many melodies for Adon Olam and Kelohenu, and here's the reason why. For many centuries, you would end a service, let's say, with Adon Olam or Ein Kelohenu, right, or both. So you're singing these particular prayers week after week after week after week. And if congregation gets used to one, they want to hear that one week in and week out, right? It's familiar. It's the ritual that has a power, right? And we come to expect it, right? And at a certain point, I think those who come week after week after week and hear the same melodies, sometimes they get tired of singing the same melody over and over and over, week after week after week. And some will say, let's create a new melody, let's add it to our list of favored melodies. And we've been at this for, a lot of centuries now. So for those who are creative, who are musical composers, right? They want to contribute. They want to add their voices and their songs to synagogue music, to the Jewish music world. And so it's imperative that we do that we continue to add to our musical culture, to our musical language, right? So we hold these two things at the same time. We have our venerable tradition that we respect and we love and we need it. It speaks to us. It holds us together as an eternal community. I mean that in a very, specific way. And at the same time, we have to continue to grow and move forward, right? So that is the delicate balance that any cantor has to pay very special and thoughtful attention to. When is it a time to introduce something new? To leave something behind? At the same time, keeping a very close watch on respecting and maintaining the tradition that is so meaningful and so powerful. And there's always a give and take in that. And in contemporary synagogues today, it's a very serious challenge. It's a whole new generation. So we have to teach the old, the great sage Rav Kook had this phrase, Hayashan Yitchadesh, make the old new, V'hechadash Yitkadesh, and make the new holy. So we take what was old, we make it new, and then we take what is new and we make it holy. And I think that beautifully sums up the process any cantor has to be mindful of and go through when choosing synagogue music. Right? So great questions. Here's another one from Rick Penn Krause. Can you address the subject of singing, performing Jewish songs, which is great, if we don't know Hebrew or what each word means? And now, I mentioned before that, Miriam, your question is one of the most often asked questions to me. Here's another one, right? And this really goes to, I think, a very serious issue, because it's not just singing, but now we're addressing the issue of prayer. The problem of contemporary prayer, or the challenge, I should call it, for contemporary Jews who may not know any Hebrew or very little Hebrew. What is that experience like for those who don't know Hebrew, either word for word or even, let's say a general idea about a prayer? Number one, of course, any clergy person would encourage you to study and learn Hebrew, to grow in your knowledge of Hebrew. That's number one. Number two, in most contemporary prayer books, the Hebrew is transliterated so that at least you can participate and make those sounds. I think there is some value in that, even if you don't know what every word means. And each prayer should be faithfully translated. So as one goes along in a service, at least one has a reference point. I think it's the job of the officiating clergy also to help teach what prayers are about, even whether it's through an introduction or reading the translation. And I would encourage those who do not know much Hebrew to have their own prayer book and focus in on some of the prayers or the melodies of those prayers that you know well and enjoy and like, and learn those specific prayers, the words of that specific prayer, word by word. I think that's a good way to start that process, right? Singing will take you the rest of the way, because if you learn to sing these songs, you're halfway there, right? So that would be my response to that. Yeah, it's a conundrum for contemporary Jews who, even those who love coming to services and love to sing or love the experience of music and love the sacred songs of the synagogue, I think we want everyone to be able to start wherever they are and go deeper and deeper and make it a continual, lifelong process, right? I don't think there's any end to that. I will tell you that I study liturgy all the time, whether I'm preparing for a Shabbat service or high holidays. I go back to the prayers and the commentaries and reread them and study them over and over and over again. So for me, I'm still not there. I don't think there's a there. wherever you are, begin and move forward. Yeah, great. So again, our theme today, offering specific Jewish prayer and music that has a healing intention, an intention of bringing comfort. We're going to hear now a setting of Misha Berach. I know most of you are familiar with this text. The text Misha Berach is first introduced into our prayers in the Torah service, so that anyone called to the Torah to chant from the Torah or recite blessings over the Torah would be given a special blessing for that honor. And over time, the Misha Berach was then moved to asking for a blessing for someone who's ill or in need of physical, if not emotional healing. Right? So there are many, many different musical settings of the Misha Berach. We all know the late Debbie Friedman's melody better than perhaps any others, but there are in fact many. Here's one that was written by a composer by the name of Valerie Shields. It's a little bit more involved. The text is a little different, but I think you'll find it meaningful and moving in its own way. And I recorded this also about, I think it was just after 9/11 when I recorded and released this CD of music for meditation and comfort and healing. So Don, if we have that ready, we can hear the Misha Berach. That was Valerie Shields' setting of Misha Berach. And I do want to mention that Valerie is not a Jew. She's a composer and choir director up in Seattle. And there is a long tradition, by the way, of those who are not Jews who have served synagogues as music directors throughout time, and who have written quite a bit of music for the synagogue. And I'm in favor of that personally. So that was by Valerie Shields. Jody, I see you on the screen. Hi. Do you have a follow-up question for me or a comment? I'd love to share with you.
It's so funny because I sit here and I listen to these pieces of music that you choose, and I just think like, I want to do this all day, every day. It's so soothing. But
And you are, I would say, Jody, that would mean you are as much a freak as I am.
Fair. I'll take it. I'll take it.
Right?
I'll take it.
And I love that.
I love it too. That's how we fell in love.
Right.
I do obviously, I have a million questions always, which is why I'm always in your office. But I'm listening to all of these beautiful pieces of music, and I know you do composing sometimes, and like all the best composers. And it's such a simple question, but there are upbeat versions of prayers, and then there are minor key versions of prayers,
Right.
and the same prayer. And I find that very interesting, that changing the major or minor chord changes the purpose of the prayer. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about like how composers decide, Kol Nidre is obviously, I think it's a minor chord, right? Like
it's in, I'll answer this way, yes and no.
Yeah.
And here's what I mean by that. It's a very actually complicated response. It's exactly as you said. It's a simple question, but the response is very deep and complicated. So let me begin with this. You go back to the ancient Greeks and the Greek philosophers, Aristotle, they ascribed to each of the Greek modes, the Mixolydian mode, the Aeolian mode, the Phrygian mode. They ascribe to each of those patterns of notes, a certain kind of emotional quality. Now that was the Greek philosophy, right? Fast forward, 20 centuries, and the great composer, one of the greatest composers of the 20th century, Igor Stravinsky, would tell you that there is no objective emotion in music.
Wow.
So what may sound joyful or mournful, or in simplest terms, happy or sad, is a personal experience when listening to or engaging in music.
Are there ever times that you hear a piece of music and you know prayer, like it's part of your DNA? Is there ever a time when you hear something you say, that is just not appropriate to the meaning of the prayer?
All the time. In fact, too often, especially among contemporary composers, when I look at a new piece of music, and by the way, every new piece of music that is published or online, you can bet that I have listened to it or played through it. And sometimes, especially more contemporary times, I hear a piece of music where the Hebrew is completely butchered, which tells me that the composer doesn't know Hebrew and is a melodist first and then a lyricist second. So they come up with a melody and then force the Hebrew text to fit that melody. I'm not a fan of that at all. But the experience of, keys or whatnot, I remember an experience when I was in the conservative synagogue in West Hartford, Connecticut. One of my members there, who was, a conservative Jew, who was born and raised in Texas, she once asked me about the Yismechu that we would sing, in the Musaf service. Yismechu v'malechutecha shomrei. Now, it depends on the presentation often as to whether you think it's sad or happy. Because if I chose a slower tempo, and sang it a little more mournfully, like Yismechu v'malechutecha shomrei shomrei. Now that would sound sad to me or mournful, but it's a Hasidic tune. Yismechu v'malechutecha shomrei. It's about the joy of Shabbat, right? But she once asked me, why do we have to sing all these sad melodies, you know, like to Yismechu? And that's the melody she is referring to, because for our contemporary 20th century American ears, if you hear yai die 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 die, which is the Phrygian mode, it sounds sad to us. And I'm a follower of Stravinsky, okay? That is neither sad nor happy nor anything else. It's just a collection of notes and a collection of patterns. What you put into it personally, you know, will determine whether it's an upbeat Hasidic tune. Like you said before, there are all kinds of approaches to these prayers. I do think at some point, you know, a composer or a cantor, hello Shbushi, should first consider, what is the prayer saying? What is the meaning of this prayer? Not just thinking of a melody. Oh, I thought of a cute melody, and now I'm gonna mash these words into it. Well, that to me is just irresponsible, right? So, but there are certain texts that can be treated like Vishamru, for instance, right? This is a prayer that is in every Shabbat service. It's a Torah text. Now, one might find joy in this commandment that the children of Israel shall observe the Shabbat in all of its joy, right? And focus on the joy of Shabbat rather than the seriousness of observing the commandment. And that could, if a composer thought that much about setting Vishamru, you know, I'm okay with that, you know, really, whether I like the musical setting or not, right? So it remains an open-ended question. There are countless versions these days of every prayer. Some of them, you know, it really comes down to a personal, a very subjective aesthetic, whether you find it moving or engaging or not. And I do think it is a sacred responsibility for any chazan to think deeply about all these things and how you want to create a worship experience and the balance of things, right? So it's a lot to hold, right? But you know, we signed up for it, and we should be good at it, right? Yeah.
You hear that, Emma Mayer?
Emma Mayer.
I hear that.
Emma Mayer happens to be a product of Wilshire Boulevard Temple and the Broward Elementary School and the Milken Community Day School and Brandeis University, correct?
Yeah, no Jewish schools there.
A lot of Jewish experience. And with this beautiful young woman and soulful and with her gorgeous voice, who is now in her second year attending the the Debbie Friedman School of Sacred Music at the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in New York City, right? So Emma, first of all, Chag Sameach to you. It's great to see you. So what do you have to share with me and with us this morning, this afternoon now?
I must admit, I just logged on because I just left another meeting and my mom said you have to join. So I don't exactly know what we're talking about, aside from what I gathered.
Well, that's okay, because this is called Music Matters. So any kind of question that you would want to ask about the purpose of music, Jewish music in particular. We're talking about all kinds of things today. We've talked about the music in the ancient temple, how one chooses a song, where do these melodies come from, what is the difference, how does it affect the listener, whether it's major or minor, or a personal imprint on a prayer. Also the challenge for modern Jews who do not know Hebrew and how they find their way into a meaningful prayer experience when we sing in Hebrew. And along those lines, and Emma, I know you'll appreciate this experience since, you know, you've sung High Holidays with me for for many, many years. About 4 years ago, actually, this was about more than 10 years ago, I first introduced this beautiful piece of music by Jeff Klepper, Cantor Jeff Klepper, one of the great composers of synagogue music from the 1970s on, right alongside Debbie Friedman. He wrote this setting of the beautiful Hannah Senesh poem, Yesh Kochavim, there are stars up above. And the first time I sang it, I believe it was Rabbi Fields, Zichronah Livracha, blessed memory, his last high holiday as senior rabbi. And he stood next to me, and it was the first year I sang it, and I asked Harvey, you know, if he liked it, and he's absolutely do it. So I did it, and I do remember him crying standing next to me. And that was, I'm sure his tears were for many reasons, but I know he was also moved by that poem. Half of it is in English. That's the first time I ever sang anything in English on the Bima at Wilshire Boulevard Temple. And that particular piece, people fell in love with immediately. They were very moved by that particular setting by Jeff Klepper and the poem. And a few years later, actually this is about 4 or 5 years ago, I just said, you know, I'm going to introduce a couple more pieces in the Yizkor service on Yom Kippur, sung in English. And I did. I sang 2 more pieces. One of them was entirely in English. And following High Holidays, I got a number of complaints. Too much English. Not kidding. And I took it to heart. And this was fascinating to me because I know some of the emails that I received, you know, Cantor, all, you know, very complimentary, and they love my music and music, but I just felt it's too many songs in English. And they admittedly, you know, offered that they don't know a word of Hebrew. But in the synagogue and on Yom Kippur, it made them feel uncomfortable to hear that many prayers sung in English. There is a magical kind of power, and it's deep within us, that the language in the synagogue should be Hebrew. Yes, a little bit of English, okay, but not too much. And that's a fascinating discussion for me, right? So that's what we've been discussing, standing on one foot, Emma.
I find that so surprising.
Isn't it though?
Yeah.
I mean, after all these years as a Cantor, I'm not surprised anymore to hear that, because there's kind of a magical incantation quality to our ancient language and these ancient prayers. You know, imagine if I sang next Kol Nidre night, God willing, we'll be back in our sanctuary, but who knows? If I sang Kol Nidre in English.
Oh, wow.
It's unthinkable. Well, that's Aramaic, and nobody knows what that prayer means, by the way, okay? But don't mess with the incantation, okay? It is what it is. Don't mess with the ritual. So, Emma, what now do you know what we've been talking about? What would you like to add?
It makes me think of, for some reason, Siri just started talking. It makes me think of a woman named Victoria Hanna, who's a vocal artist from Israel. And she studies the Kabbalistic text and the voice and how those interact with one another. And she says that that like the mouth itself is a tool of creation, and with every Hebrew letter, there's a specific, like the mouth serves as a specific tool, and that when the letters are said in a specific order, like in the Zohar, like the Kabbalistic text, or one of the main Kabbalistic texts, that a world is created. And I think that could be said, that's like a quote of hers. I think that could be said for any Hebrew text and any English text perhaps, but there's something, as you were saying, about the quality of Hebrew letters, and that that is beyond our comprehension. It's same as music, and that's I think why you receive that feedback, and why I often a classmate and I were planning our tefillot for services next week, and we were like, oh, I think that's too much English, or I think that's kind of cheesy, but it's the same exact melody in Hebrew. Yes. But it puts it, like, it's meditative. it like there's like Lashon Kodesh, it's a holy tongue, and that it is that way for a reason.
It is indeed, and I will tell you that's a beautiful point to be made, Emma. Great composers love great poets. So if a great composer is going to set a text, okay, they love great poetry, and they understand the crucial importance of the word and words. And that is why to sing something in translation, if the greater the composition of the melody of the song, the more impossible it is to sing that song in another language, because the composer set the sounds and the meanings of that language, not another one. They're non-transferable, right? And suddenly in English, it doesn't make any sense in an aesthetic realm, right?
And also that's why we love nigunim, wordless melodies, and why like speaking of Hasidic,
exactly right. So they weren't bound by the word, and with a nigun, you could interpret it at any moment in any number of different ways. It could be sad, it could be meditative or contemplative, it could be just ecstatic joy, any of those things.
And it
Kathy,
grows being bound.
Thank you. Stay with us. Kathy, I see you up there. Can we click on to Kathy? If Kathy's still with us. I think you're muted. Now you're unmuted. Do we have Kathy on there? Let me read this one. I have a comment from Rochelle Ginsburg. Hi, Rochelle. Chag Sameach to you and Eli and the whole family. Sometimes we get caught up in admiring the musical giftedness of our cantors and cantorial soloists and participants to such an extent that the congregation becomes more of an audience than active participant in the religious service. How do you achieve a balance between the two? Rochelle, that is the question of tefillah, certainly in our own time. And I think you kind of answer the question in your question, and that is finding a balance, right? And it's a delicate balance, and I will tell you, for me, it's different from week to week, depending on who's sitting in the seats. I mean, most time on Friday nights, we have our, large turnout of our regulars, and they know what to expect, and I know what to expect from them. We've been together for 20 years now. But it is a different experience all the time. And you have to wonder and be ready for the experience of, I want to engage the congregation in song as much as I possibly can. At the same time, and I know this from my own congregants who will say things to me like, I really missed hearing that beautiful Shalom Rav tonight. So I know that people who come to synagogue also want to have some moments of musical, prayerful transcendence. And I think that's my responsibility too, to provide some of those. It can't all be like that, because then they stop being transcendent and become, mundane, right? So it is a delicate balance that cantors have to pay attention to all the time, no matter what the service, right? Certainly on a Friday night, week after week with your regulars, it's much easier to achieve that balance because you get to do it all the time and learn from it and grow from it. And also create a congregation that appreciates and looks forward to hearing something new. There's that piece too. Yeah, I want my old stuff, and I like hearing some new things too, right? High holidays, obviously, it's much more difficult to, play around with the level of engagement, as it is on Shabbat. But even there too, there's a way to, encourage congregational participation. So it is a very important question, Rochelle, and I'm certain it always has been important, more so today, because 50 years ago, if you were in a conservative synagogue, a lot of people knew how to daven, and that was the way that they could participate. They knew that, they were born to it. Now we have to create something different, which can't assume any level of Hebrew literacy or understanding of Jewish, synagogue songs. So we have to approach it in a different way, and being respectful of the needs of anyone sitting in the congregation. And that's an ongoing process. So great question. Yeah. Miriam, I see you back up there.
Yes, I'd rather hear music than hear myself talk.
Me too. Me too, for sure.
But I'm very grateful for everything that you're saying. I'm learning so much.
Thank you.
My tender age, I'm
my
learning.
pleasure and my honor to share it. Don, if you're with us, we're gonna offer one more song today, and I think, and then we're gonna close this session of Music Matters. I want to thank all of our participants today: Jody, Emma, Miriam, Kathy was on there for a second ago, Rochelle for joining us, and Rick Penn Krause as well. And with this reminder, this coming Thursday morning, the last day of Passover, we'll be live streaming services, Rabbi Susan Annis and I, and it is Yizkor. We will be doing a Torah service and a Yizkor memorial service starting at 10 a.m. And we're gonna close with this next song, preparing us in a way for Yizkor. It's a piece entitled "Remember to Remember." And if you're listening to it, you can actually go on the website and find the piece if you want to follow along. But it is in English. It is in English for you. So yeah, so we're ready for Remember to Remember. And I want to thank all of you for joining me today on this session of Music Matters.
if it's all you ever do, and the truth will see you through. You will hear God sing to you forever. Remember to remember, if it's all you ever do, and the truth will see you through. You will hear God's God sing to you forever.
We'll see you all next time on Music Matters. Chag Sameach.